We're always telling your stories, and it's time someone tells ours. We're humans first, journalists second. We chose this career to give you a voice. Now we're voicing ours. It's true, journalism has much room for improvement, but not all hope is lost, and we want your trust back by humanizing one journalist at a time. We're sharing with you what we go through to bring you the news. The pain, the tears, the trauma, and the mental health struggles. It's painful, and sometimes we even work two jobs to make ends meet. But we all have something in common: the passion, the joy, and the love we feel for storytelling and holding the powerful accountable. That includes holding ourselves accountable. So here are stories from us. This is how we want to help improve the news industry. The Awakened Journalist is proud to present Media Healers by Emiliana Molina Fajardo. Hi everyone, thanks again for being with us here at the Awakened Journalist with a special project called Media Healers. Today we have the pleasure of speaking with Leslie Rangel. She's been in the news industry for almost 10 years. And while she's been in the industry, to keep a good life, personal life and work-life balance, she's also been doing yoga, which is amazing. And she's going to tell us a little bit more about that as well. She's a Latina journalist, and she's currently a morning news anchor in Austin, Texas. But before she got to Austin, Texas, she's been all over the place across the United States, starting with her first job in Market Size 142. Then she moved up to her second job in Market 42. Her third job was Market 39. She hopped around a little bit more, and now she's back in Austin, Texas. And she's originally from Dallas, first generation born here in the United States with Mexican parents. So Leslie, welcome and thank you for being here with us.
Yeah, thank you, Emiliana. I'm excited to chat with you.
Awesome, me too. Okay, so first of all, what made you become a journalist?
What made me become a journalist? I would say that age-old cliche of wanting to give people a voice. I think growing up, I definitely saw firsthand what it was like to be a minority and be first generation and not really have that representation or even um, almost like a permission to be able to speak up because I didn't really see people a lot who looked like me who were speaking up, at least in the environment that I grew up in. And so my dad was always reading the newspaper, and we would watch the morning news, and I just really enjoyed seeing that. And in high school, I got involved with our little high school newscast at the recommendation of a teacher who told me, Leslie, you have a great speaking voice, and we need more Latinos in news. You should audition. And I ended up doing it, and I never really looked back. It was nice to be able to share stories and really just find out what people's stories are. So.
That's amazing. That's awesome. What do you think has been one of the most rewarding experiences so far of being a journalist?
Um, that's a great question. I think there are many aspects that are rewarding. What comes to mind in most recently is really being able to amplify voices. Not really, I feel like a lot of times you hear giving a voice to the voiceless, and it's not really that anybody's voiceless. I see it more as just amplifying stories that don't always get told. And so for me right now, specifically in my newsroom, I've started a segment that focuses specifically on communities of color with the intention of sharing our stories, not so much for the fact that they are romanticized, I think a lot of times, but I really like to share the stories of, yes, communities of color are hardworking and resilient, but let's also too look at the portion that is difficult. And so in my stories, I like to share all of it. So if it's a great successful business, I am intentional about saying, has it always been easy? And that opens up a little bit of space to really share the full spectrum of how hard life is, and really just, the human journey called life.
I love that. Has it always been easy? So I'm going to ask you that right now. Has it always been easy for you? And especially now covering stories of communities of color, what are some of the struggles that you're finding?
Yeah, I think it definitely has not always been easy. Even just the road to get to a place where I could tell stories like this, I think was a hard, difficult road. I think naturally in journalism, there's this notion of you have to pay your dues, and that in itself is so complex. While I do agree with some portions of the pay your dues, there's a big portion of it that I don't agree with. But I will believe in it in terms of it's important to learn how to be a storyteller first in the realm of the high stress situations, in the realm of more like really learning how to cover breaking news, and then once you master that portion of it, then being able to kind of filter down through and be able to tell more of the featurey stories. And so even just that portion of getting through those years of when I was on the ground doing breaking news and being in those high stress situations where you kind of learn how to manage and handle that, that's a little bit of, it wasn't always easy. I think looking at in terms of the content of being able to share these stories, it's not always easy because I think uh, the news in general, it's no secret, and I don't think anybody would disagree that right now there's a little bit of a fracture in community trust between journalists and specifically communities of color for many, many reasons. And so sometimes it is difficult to be able to trust journalists because for one reason or another, there might just be fractures in that trust. And so, being able to really build up the trust within the community and to share that, for me personally, as a journalist, my goal is to share these stories, not so much exploit people's stories.
And what is one way, aside from telling their stories and not trying to exploit them, what is one way that you develop that trust with the communities, that you work on that trust?
Yeah, I think really and truly is just seeing people for humans. I think so many times, and it's easy to do, and I feel like there was definitely a part in my career where I would do it too, but especially when we are, in those younger years in journalism where it is all about the daily grind and just making sure we can get things on a deadline. I think it's easy to forget that people are humans, and it's easy to forget, that we're humans. And I think that's where that comes from, is when we forget that we are, living, breathing humans instead of like these news robots that have to just go, 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 go. If you can't see yourself as a human, how do you see other people as humans? And so I think that being able to work on your, in this case, I've done so much self work in really finding out, well, who is Leslie beyond just this news person? Who is she really? What are her fears? What are her strengths? What are Leslie's triggers? What are Leslie's traumas? And how have I been able to be self compassionate with myself, so that way when I'm out there in the world meeting people, I can pick up on these little things. I can pick up and notice, like, oh, well, this person I can notice has something similar to what I had. And so if I can just see this person I'm interviewing as a human instead of, oh, I just got to get the soundbite and go. I think that that's what makes the stories a lot more robust and a lot more meaningful, as opposed to, again, just okay, tell me your first name, your last name, what did you see, and okay, thanks, that's it. And then, there's not really a follow-up. And then a lot of times you're meeting people on their worst days, and so it's this weird energy exchange. And are you then keeping that weird energy without um, really healing, I think would be the best way to put it. So,
Yeah, I love that. And I mean, speaking a little bit about energy, I guess I want to go back to your first markets because those are usually the toughest, especially small markets coming from market 142. The struggle is real sometimes. And we have to wear multiple hats at the same time, sometimes being a multimedia journalist, which is basically for the people that don't know what an MMJ is doing your own camera work, editing your own stories, looking for your own interviews, recording yourself on camera, and many different jobs that can be difficult and can make it even harder to spend more time with the interviewees so that we can actually humanize them because we're under so much pressure. We have to wear so many hats, doing so many different jobs at the same time while meeting our deadlines to go on air at 6 p.m. or 11 p.m., whatever time your newscast is. And it can be really difficult sometimes. So, how were those first markets for you? And how was your energy like during that time? Were you exhausted? Did you feel drained? And I know you have been doing yoga for like the past 10 years as well. So, and sorry, this is such a compound question, so many questions in one. But how how did you cope with being in that first market?
yeah, I think the first market and even a little bit into the second, I didn't know how to cope. I really didn't. I didn't know what mindfulness was. I was doing yoga, but definitely more so as just as a workout. And I knew that after I would do yoga, I would feel better, but I couldn't quite pinpoint exactly why. And so in those first markets, I was stressed, I was anxious. I used alcohol for sure as a coping mechanism. I was just really unkind to myself, and I was really destructive, so to speak. I didn't eat the most nourishing foods, sure, partially because I couldn't afford it, but also too, looking back, could that have been an excuse? Instead of spending money on the fast food and all that, could I have bought some chicken breast and some rice and made something that was a little bit more wholesome, a little bit more nutritious. And so I think it's easy, especially when I was in those first markets, it was easy for me to just get stuck in this spiral and this constant, I always refer to it as like just the news hamster wheel of you go, 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 and there's really no end. And so, yeah, I'd say the first couple of markets, I even tried quitting news. I tried a lot of times to quit news, and for one reason or another, I just wasn't getting hired, or it wasn't working out. And so then I really took a pause to really ask myself, like, okay, you ended up in this news industry. You think you hate it, so you want to get out. Nothing's panning out. So let's take a deeper look at this. And so that's really when I began a little bit more inquiry into what is really my purpose as a journalist, and do I really like this career? And if I do, how can we work on making it better, not only for you, but also for the newsroom that you work in, and also for the stories that you're telling? And I think that's how I really began to just pause and notice, and sort of get off the hamster wheel and just say, I see you're there. I'm not going to acknowledge you right now. Right now, I'm working on me. And so that's how I just slowly began to really view things through a different lens.
Did you have one particular experience that you can reference back to that you think made you become like an observer of yourself and do that self work, um, to kind of lead you to take a pause and focus on your mental and physical health?
Yeah, I think for me, oddly enough, it didn't come until I was covering a political rally at the time, and it was one of those days where again you had to be on deadline, go live for all the evening shows, have sound, like just everything. And in this particular instance, the person who was speaking was just the person said something really hurtful about my people, about people who look like me and who have backgrounds like I do. And it was really hard in that moment for me to separate who I was as a journalist and who I was as a human. And I think in that instant, that's kind of when it clicked. Like, I am a journalist, yes, but I am also human. And I got really emotional. And it was really something that I'd never experienced before. And I felt like I had a pretty good grip on my emotions, having covered many, tragic stories, oil refinery explosions, and having covered some pretty high profile, court cases, and being more of this crime reporter. And so I felt that emotionally my container was pretty, I would say like bulletproof. And so it was very odd to me that in this particular instance, something like that, instead of something violent or traumatic, so to speak, had really affected me. And so in that particular moment, I remember crying to a coworker, and I remember he felt something similar. And he just kind of pat me on the back, and we exchanged some words. And I think it was in that moment again that I was really like, there's something deeper here. Like, what exactly is it? And that's, I think, how traumas can happen. I think traumatically, if we think about what just trauma is, so trauma is just something that happens within your life. It can be a big trauma or a little trauma. And it's just basically something that happens, and your body doesn't know how to respond to it. And so it lives in the body. And I think that when little triggers come up, that's when these traumas start to surface up. And so, was this particular moment a trauma that was happening? I'm not quite sure, but I know whatever it was triggering for me. And so from then on, like, my mission was to figure out, okay, what's at the bottom of this? What is deeper? Why was this so particularly triggering for me? And so I left away from that. At the same time, having not made a lot of money in my first couple of jobs, my second job was teaching workout and fitness classes. And I was teaching at a studio. I was teaching a bar fitness class, like the ballet bar. And the studio owner said, Leslie, I've seen you come to a few of my yoga classes. You have a beautiful practice. You should teach. And I said, no, first of all, I don't look like what a yoga person should look like, which is now, I know, a completely false nomer, that if you have a body, you can yoga. That's all that matters. But at the time, I didn't really see that. And so um, there was
I guess
something
that
that
go back to not being kind to yourself. Like one of the
exactly.
emphasis is not being kind to
Exactly.
yourself.
Exactly. Which is also, another layer if you add for women working in TV. Like, there's so much pressure on the image and what we're supposed to look like and what our hair should look like and the type of clothes we should wear. And so, it just layer upon layer. And so this lady, this yoga teacher said, I think you are absolutely capable of teaching yoga. And it was like this permission I didn't know I needed. And so somehow I ended up doing a yoga teacher training. And so that was like right at the start of when this particular incident happened at that political rally. And and it just happened to work out in that same moment that I really began to dive deeper into yoga. And it was more than just a workout, I would say. It really started as a way to really just look within and begin to peel back those layers of, like the unkindness, and to figure out why was it so emotional that for me, that someone had spoken negatively about people who look like me. And you whittle it all the way down, and that's when I think you begin to uncover these layers and really notice, like, I have a lot of stuff, and covering news is adding on to that. And so, it's natural when you keep adding weight onto things and adding on and adding on, eventually it's going to buckle. And so I think that's what had happened. And so that's kind of where this yoga journey began. And as I was going through my yoga practice, I at the same time was using the techniques that I was learning to deal with whatever news of the day happened. Even if it was just, we've got to go and cover tornadoes, and we've got to go and cover the crazy breaking news. If it was high stress, I was using, oh, okay, I know I have these tools of yoga breathing techniques that I can do. And so I frequently remember, driving across the state with my photographer, and I'd be sitting there doing yoga breathing, and he would always give me a funny look. And sometimes I'd get him to join in, and he'd be like, okay, I'll do your yoga thing. But it was really cool to be able to use that. And I feel that after I was able to use those tools to, begin to even just manage just the daily stress of news, it completely changed who I was as a journalist. I almost felt like I hopped off that hamster wheel, and it was almost like I am in control now. I get to determine how fast this wheel is going to go. And it just really changed my trajectory, I think, as a journalist, because it no longer felt like I was floating to stay above water. It felt like I was in control.
That's amazing. And question for you, have you, throughout your whole journey, dealt with issues with mental health, stress, anxiety, depression, panic attacks, whatever it may be? And how have you coped, or what tools have you used, like yoga, to get through it and identify that?
Yeah, absolutely. I most definitely. I've dealt with all of the things you just listed, and even still now, because that's, I mean, maybe some people don't experience those things, but for me, I think it'll always be a part of me. And I think what I've learned is how to manage these things. And I use many things now. I journal, I yoga, I breathe, I do mindfulness meditations. I 1000% see a therapist. She is my lifesaver, I would say. I'm a big fan of therapy. And I also use, when I say yoga, yes, I do mean like rolling out the mat and, doing a physical yoga practice. But I think, especially in the Western world, what is commonly misinterpreted is what are the many things that are also yoga. So even just you and I getting together right now and talking about mental health, that is yoga. That is yoga in itself, because we are sharing that story. We are normalizing what it is to just be a human. We are lifting these societal veils of these perfect images that we think people should be or are, and perfectionism is absolutely rooted in, I would just say, a type of life that is really unfulfilling. I think, being a human in itself is messy. It's life. It's like the seasons. There's spring times of life, and then spring will undoubtedly turn into fall. Then fall will undoubtedly turn into winter. These times where there might be, the plants die during the winter and there's death and it's cold, but there's always spring and then summer. And so I think when we always view things and want them to always be spring and sunny, I think that's where a little bit of that suffering comes from. And so yeah, just looking back and talking about what yoga can be and what yoga is, sometimes I just take a walk and really just look at the trees and feel nature. That is yoga. Cooking and really being there, really being mindful. The idea of like you're cutting peppers and really being in that moment of, you can hear the crunch, you can feel the flavors, and dropping them into the pan and hearing the sizzling. Really just this idea of being mindful, and that helps a lot, when I'm dealing with anxiety. Because what is anxiety? It's a fear of the future, whatever's to come. And so when we can live in these moments of the present, that's where life really is. So
It's so true. And not living in the past as well, because that's usually when we start getting depressed or sad or
mhm.
um and I just got hungry after your mental picture with pickles. um Anyways, Leslie, so what would you like the world to know about journalists? There's
Well,
one thing you could tell the world.
one thing I would like the world to know about journalists is that I would say that we are humans just like you are. There, just like there are people in your life that are great or maybe not so great for you, so too there can be journalists that are great for you that are not so great for you. And that's not in some sort of I guess agenda type of way. It's more so just some people you'll jive with their energy and some people you won't. And so the most important thing I think is that journalists, most of our mission is, and when I say most of our mission, most people in journalism, their mission is to really just share stories and really let people know what's going on. And so I would absolutely encourage you to know what's going on in your community. When we don't know what's going on in our community, it's kind of how I said at the beginning, like if you don't know who you are as a human, how can you go out there and know who other people are? And so in the same way, if you don't know what's going on in your community, how can you go out there and live life and be a good, citizen if you're not informed? And so I would say get plugged in and connected to local journalists. Local journalists are we live in your community. We are in your community. We experience the same things that you experience in the community. And so, get plugged in with a few local journalists, check out their stories, see what they're writing about. And, if one doesn't, if maybe you don't like the way one particular journalist hair looks like, that's fine. We can all have opinions. Maybe it's a projection that you don't know that is happening. And so maybe pick another journalist. But I would say that really the mission is to just share the truth and share stories. And if you feel that they're not doing that, we'll send them an email, have them do a story on whatever issues you feel are important to you. Because I think, again, that's ultimately the goal.
For sure, yeah. And just make sure that when they send that email, you have valid arguments. And I'm sure every journalist, well, I mean, I can't speak for everyone, but I'm sure most journalists would probably make an effort to tell that story that you want to be told.
Yeah.
Um, what is something that you would like for the industry to improve, or that you think we can do better as journalists, especially nowadays when there's so much misinformation and a lot of news outlets are being called fake news.
That's a great question. I would say, that's such a loaded question. There's so many things
Yeah.
I feel the news industry should really look at. I guess I would just offer the news industry the same thing. Really, if you're a manager, if you're a journalist, if you're a news director, if you're an editor, photojournalist, whatever you are, really take time to look within. Because I think when we can look within and check in with ourselves, we humanize ourselves. And when we humanize ourselves, we can then look out to others and really notice, well, am I treating these people as humans before they are my coworkers or my journalists or my interviewees? And I feel that if we can really look within, and figure out who are we, I feel that that in turn can go towards the outside and really change, many things that I think, the industry needs to shift, from diversity, from inclusion, from making sure that the people in your newsroom reflect the people in your community, to workloads, to being able to just ask someone, hey, how are you doing? Are you doing okay? To maybe even really listening for a story that a journalist really wants to do. um, there's so many aspects I think that we can always work on, personally and professionally. So
I love that. And I think that that's great, valuable advice. And that I applaud you because I feel like you're an example of looking within, which leads me to your other business, which is the News Yogi, Yoga for Journalists. And I think this journey of being in the news industry for 10 years, going through the ups and downs, the times that aren't always easy, I think you found balance in doing yoga. And I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like this has helped you so much that you want to share it with other journalists because you know and you empathize with what we go through and the stress and the struggles, the challenges, the difficult stories, the trauma behind some of the stories, whether it's a homicide, an explosion, a hurricane, whatever it may be. And I love that you're offering that to other colleagues to help, um, I guess, from your perspective and your experiences, improve the news industry through yoga. So tell me a little bit about the News Yogi.
yeah, absolutely. Thanks for asking. I mean, that is exactly, why I am so passionate about it, because I have been there. And the news yogi, I always like to, credit a friend of mine. Not that, this was an idea that I'd sat with for many, many years, but ultimately it never came to fruition because I didn't know if journalists would be interested in talking about, yoga and energy and chakras and meditation and mindfulness and chanting and, all of the things with yoga. And it was really right at the height of the pandemic that a friend of mine, a fellow journalist and fellow entrepreneur, Deborah Alfarone, she's so wonderful, but she coaches, um, younger journalists, and I would say older journalists as well, to really just have more confidence on camera and to be able to be a better journalist in terms of storytelling and standing up for yourself. And so she asked me right at the height of the pandemic, like, Leslie, you seem to have everything so well put together. You're always talking about yoga. Can you do a meditation for me and my clients? And I was like, yeah, absolutely. Are you sure? Are you sure you just want to do meditation? And so we set it up, and this was like May 2020. And I was really nervous because again, I didn't know what it would be like to lead journalists through a visualization meditation, to be able to talk about envisioning yourself for the goodness or for a higher purpose of yourself. And so I did the meditation, I got done, and I was a little nervous, and I was just floored away with the feedback I got. There were maybe at least a dozen journalists on the call, and they all said like, okay, this was amazing, like how do we do this, how do we need more of you?
Yeah.
And so it was almost like I was like, okay, well, this is the permission I didn't know I needed, and clearly this is a void that really needs to be filled. And I just continued. And my mission with Yoga for Journalists is really to create healing and a safe space for journalists to talk about healing through yoga and community, with an emphasis on making sure that it is also a safe space for BIPOC journalists and all identifying journalists, because I feel that as someone who is Latina and who is first generation Mexican American, sometimes it might feel that yoga spaces aren't catered for us or aren't made specifically for us, or we might not have, that yoga person look. And so my goal again with Yoga for Journalists is making sure that all identifying journalists, any color, all colors, can practice and find a little bit of that healing, find a little bit of that pause and community that I think might sometimes feel difficult to find.
And I love that you got that feedback after class. Like, where do we find more of this? How can we do this? Because I'm sure it probably helped you with that self-limiting belief of, are you sure? Like, yes, we're sure. You're amazing. Like, believe in yourself. That's awesome, Leslie. And last question. So before we finish up, words of wisdom that you've picked up along the way that you want to leave your fellow colleagues with.
Yeah, I don't know where I picked it up or if I just made it up, but I would say we're humans first, we're journalists second. Always, always, always remember that. And I on my social media page for the News Yogi, I always say, remember to say no. I think a lot of times early on, I was so eager to always say yes to everything, always, always yes to everything. And part of it, sure, was rooted in trying to get ahead in my career, but also I know part of it was rooted in the limiting belief of, am I doing enough? Am I doing enough? I've got to do more. I've got to do more. And that's quickly how that hamster wheel begins to go. And I think when we can take a pause and say no and recognize that even if you are single and don't have kids, you can say no. You can say no to coming in after you've come in, for the past 3-4 weeks on your off day. You can say no this time. It's okay. And just because you don't have kids doesn't mean that you are available all the time. No, you still have a personal life.
Boundaries.
Yeah, exactly. So just, remember, you're a human first and a journalist second. So.
Totally agree. And boundaries, boundaries, boundaries are so key in our industry and this job. Leslie, thank you so much. This has been amazing. Thank you for speaking with me and telling me a little bit about your story and your journey.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much.
Journalists, this one's for you, to help you heal, to help you understand your worth, and to help you know you're not alone. So share the love and subscribe to Spotify and YouTube and follow us on Instagram. The Awakened Journalist is proud to present Media Healers by Emiliana Molina Fajardo.